Good morning. I'm Bonnie Gardner. I'm co-chair of the Public Affairs Forum of the First Unitarian Universalist Church of Austin. We're located at 4700 Grover Avenue. Our forums occur most Sundays at noon and are free and open to the public. We encourage you to attend. For more information on our forums, you can go to our church website at www.austinuu.org. And now, Judy Sadak, a member of our forum committee, is going to introduce today's speakers and today's program. Judy?
I am a member of the forum committee. I'm also a member of the Social Justice Committee and Action for Justice, which is our political group here. And today's forum comes out of the concern of many of us and of you and of the members here for the women and children who have been coming into the United States to seek asylum. Several years ago, some of us demonstrated at the Hutto Family Detention Center, and that was successfully shut down. Family detention has come back in a big way in Texas, and we really detest that. It's my pleasure this morning to introduce to you Christina Parker and Paul Pfeiffer. Christina is the Immigration Projects Director at Grassroots Leadership, and she's been involved with human rights organizations and immigration rights organizations in Texas and elsewhere. Paul is a volunteer co-chair of a visitation program at the Karnes City Detention Center, and so he can tell us a lot about that. We look forward to hearing from you. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Judy.
Thank you, Judy.
Yeah, I'll get us started. My name's Christina. I'm really happy to be here with y'all. As Judy said, I work with Grassroots Leadership. We're a nonprofit that's based here in Austin, and we look at issues of private prisons. And it might not seem immediately clear why private prisons and immigrant detention would overlap, but some of you may know that immigrant detention is actually a really big cash cow for the private prison industry, and in fact, this new return of family detention is greatly benefiting the private prison industry. And the two family detention facilities are both run by private prisons, and so that's how we come to sort of look at this and how we analyze this. So I'm going to give you just a quick overview of family detention as it's come back, what's happened, why it's happened, what's the situation right now. All the way up until just Friday, there was a court decision that many of you may have heard of, and I'll talk a little bit about that. And then I'll turn it over to Paul, who's been inside the facility a lot and knows a lot about what's going on in Karnes. So many of you may remember this summer when photos leaked from Border Patrol holding stations of kids, lots and lots of kids piled into these centers. I'm sure many people have seen that. Is that right? And so when that happened, we saw the response. We saw the xenophobic protests in Marietta. We saw everything that came after that. But one thing that was really not reported as much was that, yes, there were many children who came alone, but many children also came with their mothers. And a reason for this is that mothers and children, women and children, are of particular risk in Central America right now for violence. Domestic violence, gang violence, sexual violence, domestic violence. And so women and children were also coming to the border, asking for help and asking for asylum. The response to this has been to lock them up, to detain them. Why did this happen? Why were they locked up? And what happened before? Before, it was very rare that families would be detained. There was one family detention facility that remained in the country after the protests at Hutto that Judy mentioned. That place was shut down as a family detention center. It's still open, but it holds adult women. And one family detention center remained in Berks County, Pennsylvania, and it had 96 beds. So family detention was very rarely used. Families were held there very rarely. But when this happened this summer, something changed. Something had to change. And I think there's an assumption by a lot of people, and it's an assumption that I share, that that this was a decision made in the White House. That this didn't come from Congress. This didn't come from ICE all by themselves. This came from the White House. It came from Obama himself saying, he gave a speech where he said, we're going to make sure that they're detained and processed and deported in a quickly orderly fashion. And why would he do that? I think one of the things that was cooking at the time was that Obama was preparing to announce a new immigration action. Right? We saw in November that he expanded a program to offer a temporary path to temporary legalization for some people, for parents of U.S. citizens and green card holders. And this was something that was cooking. It hadn't been announced yet, but it was happening in the White House. He also did other things like ended a secure communities program, which has been very controversial, especially in this county. And so as he's preparing to do this, there's an image problem now suddenly of the borders being, flooded and this insurgence at the border and all of these kinds of words happening in the media. And so something had to be done to solve this image problem. And this something was to say, well, we're going to lock you up and detain you. And deport you quickly. And that kind of solved the image problem. To get tough solved that image problem. So the first big family detention center that was opened was in Artesia, New Mexico. And it was opened in a federal law enforcement training center. Artesia is very remote. It's close to Hobbs and Farmington. So very remote place in New Mexico. And it's where they actually trained the Border Patrol. And it could hold 672 women and children. And so they retrofitted this training center. They rolled in cribs. You can look up these photos online of just cribs piled into like hallways and things like that. And they started holding families and children there, but it was only mothers and children. And so that was different from Hutto, where they held mothers and fathers with their children. And this was meant to deter them. At the time that shortly after Artesia was opened, a Department of Homeland Security Secretary Jay Johnson said, this is a message. We are going to detain you. If you come here, you will be sent back. That's an almost direct quote. But if you come here, you will be sent back. And this issue of family detention being used as a deterrent and these comments by both Obama and Secretary Johnson are very important. And I'll come back to them, but just hold that in your mind. Many people called this the mommy penalty because this was happening only to mothers and children. Only mothers and children were being held in Artesia. Reports have been that if mothers and children and fathers were coming to the border, they were all being detained, but the father was being taken and put separately. That if fathers came alone with their children, they were largely just being given a notice to appear, which is kind of the process that it's always been. You come to the border, you ask for asylum, and they say, okay, here's a date, show up for your court date. But for some reason, mothers and children were the ones being detained. And what's particularly, upsetting about that is, as I said, they're the ones who are really suffering the violence, really the targets of violence in Central America. And so it was precisely these people that the government wanted to deter from trying to come to the border and seek asylum. The government instituted a no-bond policy, both at Artesia and later at Carnes, and it continues at Dilley, where no bonds would be given, even if you pass your credible fear interview, which is the threshold for proving that you have an asylum case. That's kind of the first step, and it proves that you can move forward with your asylum case. Even if they pass that, they would not allow you to bond out of the facility. And the government argued, ICE attorneys argued that this was because the women were a national security risk, that they came here as part of what they called active immigration networks, which could hide potential threats, right? Which is a ridiculous proposition when you go in there and you meet these women and you see who they are and why they've come here. So next came centers in Texas. Next was opened Carnes, which is the facility that Paul coordinates visitation at. And then Dilley came in December. They're both in very remote areas of South Texas, just as Artesia was. Artesia has since been closed, but only to open the way for Dilley, which is massive. To give you an idea of how remote they are, if you can imagine, Austin is here, San Antonio is here, and Carnes and Dilley are like that. Very, very remote places. Carnes is currently being expanded. They're constructing it to build it out to 1,200. Is that right, Paul? Mm-hmm. 1,200 beds and cribs in Carnes. This makes it one of the largest detention centers in the country, and we have hundreds of detention centers in the country that hold tens of thousands of people every day. Dilley is currently being built, and it's going to be expanded to 2,400. That makes Dilley the single largest detention center in the country, regardless of population or where it is. It's the single largest detention center in the country.
If I could just insert there. It's being built. It's actually comprised of an existing man camp, which was used for the oil field workers. So they've just kind of brought in type mobile homes. It's just like there's a picture currently floating around, and it looks very much like the internment camps from World War II.
Thank you, Paul. That's right. So to give you an idea of just how big these numbers are, at the beginning I told you that there was a facility in Berks County, Pennsylvania that held 96 beds and cribs. Now we're looking at approaching 4,000. So this is something that's been ramped up. It's deliberate, and it's just a huge spike to happen in just the span of a few months of holding these women and children. The only thing we can really compare this to in our history as a country is Japanese internment, as Paul said. And if you look at the photos, the man camp that's been converted into the Dilley Detention Center looks very much like those kind of barracks that we all remember from those photos. So what are these places like? I want to tell you a little bit more about them. So Artesia, as I said, was a law enforcement training center before it was kind of retrofitted. They rolled in beds and cribs. Almost immediately there were reports of sexual assault. There were a lot of problems, and attorneys had a lot of complaints right out the bat. They said that they were upset that guards were leading the women and children around, male guards alone, not in pairs or with a woman or anything like that. One of the biggest complaints was medical care. Chickenpox was spreading through the facility, for example. But one of the things that really came out of Artesia was a problem with the women giving their interviews, their credible fear interviews to the judge. They have to talk about what happened and why they came here. And a lot of times those stories are extremely disturbing and upsetting. A lot of times it implicates the father of the children that the woman came with, or talking about extremely traumatic and violent things that happened in their neighborhood or things like that. And one of the problems that came out of Artesia was that they said that the women and children could not be separated. The mothers and children couldn't be separated. So the mothers had to give these interviews talking about violence, rape, assault in front of their children. And so there was a lot of complaints that this hindered their ability to give their interview and be honest, and that it also only served to, if they were honest, to re-traumatize the child and the mother. So that came out of Artesia. Carnes is a detention center that was built recently. It was built a few years ago, and up until August, it had been holding just men. It was built to live up to supposed new, better standards of detention, and in fact, a lot of the media tours that ICE gave talked about the softer side of detention. They talked about how it had how it had an open plan, so there's like a playground in the middle and things like that. But almost immediately, there were also charges of sexual abuse by guards there. There was a guard inside who was a whistleblower who told the Karnes County Commissioner's Court that he believed that the GEO group was understaffing the facility, and that was leading to guards having the opportunity to sexually harass or assault women there. DHS investigated, and they said that they found no fault there, but the woman who was one of the witnesses is still sticking by her story there. One of the really extreme cases, and this may be one that you've heard of, was of a young girl named Nayeli and her mother Sarah were detained in Karnes. Nayeli had a brain tumor. She's a 7-year-old girl, and she has a brain tumor, brain cancer, that she had been receiving treatment for in El Salvador, but her mother fled the violence there. She told the Border Patrol, and she told ICE, and she told the GEO guards that her daughter had brain cancer. She had a shunt in her head, and that she needed more treatment. And ICE and GEO just said, if anything happens, we have doctors here for that. 3 U.S. doctors looked at her most recent medical exams and medical records from El Salvador, and they all concluded that she needed immediate medical care, that she was at risk of dying or going into a coma or having a seizure at any minute. And ICE still did not move. And so many people in this room, actually, I'm sure, got the call to call ICE and tell them, release Nayeli, we can't believe this is happening. And after just 2 days of that, ICE did release her, and she's now getting care. Other things that were reported at Karnes were that it's cold. I've been there, and I don't know if Paul has had the same experience, but they're like blasting the AC, and it's cold, that kind of cold where it makes you feel sick. Women complain of weight loss, of aggression in their children, and they complain that they're actually never allowed to put the babies down, some sort of rule that ICE has. And they bragged about it, actually. I went on a tour there, and the guards were like, no, we make sure that the mothers are mothering. We don't let them, like take a break or whatever. I don't know what that means. But the problem was that they weren't letting toddlers and babies crawl around and run around and play, which of course they need to do. So that's Carnes. So Dilley, as Paul said, is a former man camp for the oil field workers. You know, the fracking boom, of course, that's happening in this part of the country. I think there are environmental concerns there. I'm no expert on that, but I know that plenty of people are asking that question. Is the water even safe here? It's owned, the land is owned by a man named Red McCombs, who, if you're a UT football fan, you may know who he is. And there were protests last December and November by students and others at the university where the business school bears his name, asking him to please recuse himself and break the lease and get out of this deal. He has not, though. CCA runs this facility. They're the same ones that ran the Hutto Detention Center, and they continue to run the Hutto Detention Center. And they call these barracks or trailers or whatever you want to refer to them as, they call them neighborhoods, and they're building them out in phases right now. One of the things I've heard from people who have been there is that there's very little common space. You know, if you just imagine sort of rows of trailer homes, there's very little common space or places for people to congregate, but that also raises questions for me about how isolated these places are and how easily it would be, for instance, for a guard to be in a trailer home and for no one to see them, compared to Carnes, which, you know, is more open plan. One of the things that we've heard from people who've been at Dilley, and this may surprise you, is that it's nice there. They say that there's granite countertops and that the homes are very nice and very new and all of that. And that raises an interesting question for me, is even if these places were great and even if nothing bad ever happened there, they still should never exist. That's how I see it. And so it seems very calculated that they're making them look as nice as possible, right? But the truth is these places should never have existed. They should have never been opened. And in my opinion, it doesn't matter what the conditions like are. I mean, it matters for the people who are there, and the conditions should be better in there, but what really should happen is that these places should be shut down immediately. There is a bright spot. On Friday, a judge in D.C. ruled that ordered the detention stopped. He ordered them halted. And he based this on the fact that he said, well, the Obama administration cannot use detention as a deterrent. Remember, I said earlier that everything about the ramp-up of detention, they said, this is a deterrent. This is to send the message. If you come here, you will be sent back. The judge in D.C. ruled that they couldn't do this, that you couldn't use detention as a way to deter other people from doing something. Imagine if we did that in other areas of our criminal justice system. We'll lock you up so other people won't do something. And we'll see what happens with that. It's very new. As I said, it just happened Friday. Some reporters were reporting that immigration attorneys were saying they were very optimistic about this, and they expected that families would start being released as soon as this coming week. Others have said that, well, you know, we can expect them to just detain them and now use a different rationale. You know, they've already sort of established that they've called these women national security risks. So, you know, it remains to be seen what will happen next, and maybe depending on how optimistic of a person you are, which side you think will prevail. But certainly something has changed there, and we hope that it's a door to end this. And that's it for me, Paul.
All right, thanks, Christina. So I'd like to talk to you first about visitation and what life is actually like in the facility in Carnes. As Christina mentioned, it's kind of been touted as a flagship for ICE and for the private prison groups. It's meant to be something quite spectacular place to keep these people imprisoned in. As Christina mentioned, Hutto and also Dilley are run by CCA, which is Correctional Corporation of America, but Carnes is run by GEO Group, which is a private nonprofit, or a private for-profit group, not publicly listed like CCA is. So a little bit different. It makes it kind of unique how the two seem to function separately from each other, but are still under the auspices of ICE. When you go into the facility, it looks just like any other institution that you might go into. It's got cinder block walls, and it's all painted beige. In the medical areas, they have like little cartoon characters painted on the walls, and in some other areas of the prison, they have these embellishments to make it feel more, I don't know, like a kindergarten, I guess. Doesn't really weigh for the teens that are in there, because there are teens very much in there, and so it seems kind of silly for those things to be in place, because there's not really anything for those kids to focus on other than the beige walls. They do have soccer fields, but in my formal visit of the facility, because it was a weekday and it was during school time, there were no children playing in the fields. Ironically, when I went on Christmas Day, when there would have been no school, and it was a really nice day, not unlike what we had on Saturday here, really clear, and like 70s, something like that, really nice weather. There was maybe only 20 kids playing soccer and out on the fields, on either one of the fields. So it brought to my mind, what are these kids doing and why aren't they out? If they are in their rooms all the time, then what are they doing? They do have a rec room where they can watch television, but as one child commented, it's like, but it's all in English. I'd like to hear Spanish TV. I'd like to watch Spanish shows. And his English was quite good, and I told him so, and he was like, yeah, well, thank you, but I'd still like to hear TV and watch TV in my own language. So school is from 8 to 5. They have lunch from 11 to 12. It's pretty much standard cafeteria-style food, what we all get here in the States in major institutions, kind of bland, greasy, starchy food. But because of that, this is not a cuisine that the people who are coming here are used to. And so as Christina mentioned, there are drops in weight, there are stomach problems, there are all sorts of issues. Some children just refuse to eat, so that leads to other health issues. Some have chronic migraines because of the food or the lack of food. The facility is proud to state that they have rice and beans and salsa available all the time at all meals. And it's just kind of like, well, in my travels in Mexico, I have not seen a whole lot of people who just eat rice and beans all the time. It's just like, it's nice, and it is certainly staple items, but it's not what people would eat all the time. And so to contrast that with the greasy, starchy foods isn't exactly great. Interesting thing about the school, though, is that we've recently come to discover that the numbers are capped in the classes, so that if this teacher has so many students, then that's it. And if you have more students of that age range, then they are simply not allowed into school. So what happens to them? We don't have any other information on that, but that is an interesting facet of how life inside the facility is. On Tuesdays of each week, they have a Catholic Mass. A lot of the families inside are Catholic, but then there are some other Protestant faiths that are also in there. And the chaplain who is on staff there does offer Protestant services, but it's not really formed. In the time that I was privy to his service, it seemed very unstructured, and as he strummed on his guitar, there wasn't any particular tune that was being played, and there were no people really singing either. So it was kind of curious as to what was happening there. Living conditions are, once again, each room is beige painted cinder blocks. There are 8 beds in bunk bed format, so 4 bunk beds per room, and in each is a mother and a child. Well, not all of these mothers have only one child. So where do the children go? Well, the children are put into other bunk beds in other rooms. So oftentimes you have families that are literally separated from each other. The mother will have the youngest child with her typically, and the older children are then somewhere else in the facility. One woman remarked that she never really knew where her 10-year-old was at night, and that very much concerned her. Something else that happens, Christina did mention cribs are available in the facilities, and indeed they are. But oftentimes the mothers are on the bunk bed with their infant or toddler, and they have to sleep on the edge to protect the child from falling off. They don't have an option on that in some cases. Maybe they don't have enough bunks or carriage cribs, I should say. I don't know what the reasoning for that is, but maybe it's like Christina was mentioning. It's just like they want to engender true parenting or real mothering so that the child is always with the parent at all points. But we can understand how difficult that must be to always have to crib your child on a top bunk. On the media tour that I went on, it was interesting to see that ICE said they were very proud to show that they had 2 refrigerators outside of the play areas, and they were stocked with fresh fruits and juices and milk. And when I went, it was in the middle of the morning, about 10:30. I think that would be a good time for children to have snacks or have a carton of milk or something like that. As I passed the refrigerators, they were all fully stocked to the very front of the shelf. The crates that held the fruit were pretty much filled, and there was no child or parent on the playgrounds or sitting in the benches around who were drinking a juice or milk or anything. So it seemed like this these things were not being used at all. We had a woman who was inside after she bonded out. She said that the media tours are quite a farce, that they stock the facilities, and then when the tour is finished, they take all the food back out again. So this food is not really anything that's truly available for them. It would be if they had that opportunity to go in and sneak an apple in that hour tour, then that would be their chance for a snack. So quite an interesting situation there. In regards to the food as well, because of the poor quality of the food, like in any prison, you have a store. Some of them, they have one day a week when inmates can go and purchase things from the store. And it might be like candy bars or other food type items. Sometimes it's HBAs, health beauty aids, or maybe socks, some small clothing items like that. And in kind at the Carnes facility, they have a commissary as well. The money has to come from outside. Typically, it's inferred that the family is going to send them money. And so you wonder how a family in El Salvador is going to send dollar bills to Carnes, et cetera, et cetera. You can see how it would kind of break down. They have the opportunity to work in the facility. They can earn $3 a day doing tasks such as sweeping up the yard or picking up any trash, which I couldn't imagine there would be a whole lot of trash, those type things. But they have different tasks for them available to earn that money. But then when you go to the commissary, you're paying regular store prices with a little bit of a hike. So that $3 isn't really going to go very far. But we have heard many of the moms say that because the food is so bad that their children live off of cup of noodle, or is it the ramen cup. They also have some beans. They can buy whole dry beans, and the moms have actually gone through the process of soaking them overnight and then cooking them in the microwave in the community area where the TV is in the various dorms in order to try to make it work out. But there's no spices or anything like that, so I really wonder, what is that like? How does that work? Another thing that was interesting about the media tour was that we went into a library that was touted as being perfectly available for all of the families inside, and they go in and review the books or check them out, take them into the rooms. And on either side of the library were two computer bays. One was construed as being a legal library or legal computer bay where they could do legal research, and it was supposedly had some static legal information loaded on those machines. And then another one that was free access to any type of search you would want. There were restrictions on websites. But when we were in there, there was no one using the library. There was no one using any of the computers. And when we've talked to women about that, they say that typically the computers do not work, and the last was that there was only one that was actually functioning. So we can see that there's seriously a breakdown in what's happening with what they are telling us. They are given different activities that they can do throughout the day. These are coordinated inside the facility, but they're essentially like arts and crafts type things. So you can make bracelets or little necklaces, things like that. It seems a bit kind of trivial for these moms to be doing inside. That's a bit of a brief overview. Christina, is there anything that you can think of that I would have missed about interior?
No. Are you going to talk about the protest?
I am.
Okay.
I am. Found out a few weeks ago, it was really kind of a miraculous story came out, and that was of a woman who began singing in her room with her roommates. And they continued to sing, and the guards kept coming and saying, "You must stop that. That's not allowed. You cannot sing like this as a group." And they said, "Whatever, we're going to continue to sing." And they persisted, and the guards came again and said, "You have to stop this." And they persisted. And they persisted so that they finally said, "Fine, we will set up a place for you to have your singing sessions in." And so that engendered a community support that came from within. More miraculous was something that came out from a story this week, was that there was actually a protest inside by the women against how the bonds were being distributed amongst the people. And I find that to be quite marvelous, that there was enough participation from within and enough camaraderie that they could say, "We see this is not right, and we are protesting from within. So, wow, kudos to those women. That's really incredible. I would like to think that somehow the sentiment that we feel outside is indeed making its way in, and they are understanding that there are people outside who feel that it's not right that they are in prison and who feel that they should have more justice in their lives, particularly because of where they've come from and that they are seeking asylum here in the United States. So that's kind of an insight into the daily life. In regards to the visitation program, when you go in to visit, one thing to keep in mind is that you are very much in a personal space. You're put in a room with an individual, and you cannot take anything with you. You cannot take a cell phone to show pictures. You cannot take a pen or paper to write. You go in to just talk to this person, to listen to this person. Maybe not to advise, but really just to listen and to be there and to support them. So it really changes the way you see things, and it certainly changes the way these families see things inside, because it's often the only hope they have. They do talk to each other and they do share stories with themselves, but in a sense, you're kind of feeding each other, because they all come from stressful is an understatement backgrounds or situations that led them here. So those kind of can feed on each other, and so it helps to have someone come in from outside who has a different perspective and whose daily life doesn't exist within the same four walls all the time that are beige and cinder block. But a lot of great things come out of visitation. We've had friendships that have continued beyond release. We have stories of people who were bonded out and who stay with families who originally started visitation with them, and that becomes such an exhilarating experience for the family who hosts. It really changes their lives, and certainly it's changed the lives of the people who are there, because they, once they're out, in some cases they don't have any other place to go. Although about 80% of the families who come to the United States seeking asylum have some family member here in the States. It may be that it's the mom and the kids and the dad's already here, or there's a cousin or other family member. Sometimes it's parents who are here, and they are coming to join them. So indeed, there is always an option for them to be with someone other than to be imprisoned in these facilities. When Judy first contacted us about speaking here, it was along the lines of, what can you do? And I'd like to address that briefly. Visitation is certainly something that you can do. There's the Hutto facility visitation program that you can attend. And if you want to make the drive to Carnes, I'm sure we could set something up for you to visit there as well. Or if you feel the need to start your own visitation program separate from ours, that would certainly be welcome, because there are strength in numbers. Excuse me. Donations. If you'd like to donate, there are a few sites that you can find information and also sources for donation. And just three off the top of my head are LIRS, which is Lutheran Immigration Refugee Services, LIRS.org, and also JRS, which is Jesuit Refugee Services, JRS.org. And one organization that's very instrumental in the work in Carnes is Raíces Texas, and they are raicestexas.org, and Raíces is the Spanish word for roots, but it is RAICES, Texas, all one word, .org. If you go to Raíces Texas, you actually have an option under the Donate button to choose the Carnes Bond Fund, and that is where you can give money towards the bond fund, and I'll just speak on that briefly now. When these people come here, typically they don't have a whole lot of money. Usually, in some cases, I won't say usually, they use coyotes to bring them up here. And so a lot of the money that they have goes to that coyote, or the family members give them money or get monies to the coyotes' counterparts in their home country. So they're really struggling, and economic issue and strife is something that they all know. And as we've heard from stories inside, this is something that is continuing to be a preoccupation with them, because they realize that these bonds are going to be given to them, and it could be any amount from $1,500 to $70,000 based on whatever the judge depends. So then that becomes a real preoccupation. Where is this money coming from? He didn't have any money. Where are we going to get an extra $5,000? Those type things. So the bond money or the bond fund is a way that you can help out to get these people out and onto their lives again and try to gain asylum and go through the process a little more normally than they are currently going through. If they don't get bonded, they don't get the bond funds, then they would stay within the facility and continue the asylum process if it was seen that they passed their credible fear interview and could continue down that path. Otherwise, they are deported. And the deportation is probably the saddest end to the story, and it really comes like a thief in the night. We've had people who've gone in and spoken with a woman and said, I'll be back to see you on Thursday, only to come back on Thursday and have no idea where the woman's at anymore, to have shared email and phone number with the woman, but to never hear from her again. And it makes you wonder what happened. Was she deported? Was she killed as soon as she landed? We don't know these things. We simply don't. I think saddest for me was when I came in from a flight, and the steward, I made comment on this very large, unmarked plane. I was like, what is that? She said, that's the deportation plane taking everyone back. And it was so massive, and it was so bare bones. It could make economy class look quite nice, I would think. But anyway, what else can you do? You can self-store something. In San Antonio, and we don't have confirmation if it works the same here in Austin, but when a person is bonded out, if they have no place to go particularly, they are shuttled to the Greyhound bus station. We have a program where it actually goes to the bus stations in the evenings, starting about 5:30 and maybe staying until like 11 or so, to just look and see. And the people, when they're dropped off, are pretty obvious to see because they either have a large trash bag with their belongings in it, or sometimes they'll have gallon Ziplocs with their belongings in it. But it'll be something that looks very crude and rough, and you can see that it's not many things. And they'll usually be a small family, and they'll usually look uncertain as to what their next step is. But you can go, and you can go offer hospitality to them. We have a backpack program that has been created where non-perishable foodstuffs and bottled water, a blanket, some clothing items to help people on their path are given to them, and the folks just stay there and kind of direct them to, what gate they need to go to the bus station, or to kind of help them through that process, or to say, well, you're not going to have a bus until Wednesday, and today's Monday, so what do you plan on doing? We have a home you can stay in if you'd like. Some people take them up on that offer. Others are like, no, that's fine. Our bus leaves tomorrow, or we really don't feel safe just going with a stranger right now, even though, you're here and you're talking to us. So, but that is another possibility for you, as well as, like I say, backpack collection. A group of people can come together and decide to source backpacks and the items that you fill them with, and then distribute those accordingly. There's also Sacred Heart Catholic Church, which is actually right there at Ground Zero on the border in McAllen. And you can go there and you can volunteer to pass out clothing and other supplies to the families who come through there. Because when they come through there, it means for whatever reason they weren't moved into the facilities. I know that sometimes early on in the season, I guess you'd say, when they had too many beds filled, then they just didn't have any place to put people. So they would just say, well, okay, well, here, we're just letting you out. And what kind of method is that? We ran out of room, so we're just going to change the law for you people. Well, it's not exactly just for the others, but when they're released, they go to Sacred Heart because it's right across the street from where they're released from. A lot of people have traveled from all over the nation to Sacred Heart to help out with that very, very valiant effort there. So that's another option. The last thing that I have to say in regards to how you can do something is you can buy a T-shirt, which I have some in the back. They're only $10, and the money from those sales does go to the Karn City Bond Fund. So I think we're maybe just a little bit shy of our discourse time, but
I do just have a couple of action items to, just a few last things before we go to questions. There are a couple other things you can do. One is to come to the film on Friday and bring a friend. Tell someone what you've heard here today and make sure others know about it. So that film is here on Friday at 7. The other thing you can do is mark May 2nd on your calendar. On May 2nd, we'll be leading a protest in Dilley, Texas. And if you'd like, you can organize a caravan or a group from your church or your community to join us there. So that's May 2nd. It's a Saturday. And also, if I could just ask you to sign up for action alerts on other things that you can do. Like the example I mentioned of the little girl with brain cancer, it was the calls of people from the community calling ICE and telling them, what is your problem? How can you be doing this? That finally made them relent and release her. So there's always opportunities like that to try to help get a family released. And I'll pass out, I'll just maybe circulate this as we move to questions. Does that sound good?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Right, and I have one last website, and that's change.org. You can go to change.org, and they have a number of petitions that are out there related to individuals within these facilities, not only in Texas, but other facilities. There's also opportunities for helping bond people out. So change.org is also on the sign-up. Christina's passing out. It's grassroots, and so they're Austin. If you have, if you need particular contact for me further south in the San Antonio area, just put an annotation out to the side, and Christina will make sure to get that to me.
And thank you again. And now we'll have our questions. We have a little less than 20 minutes, so raise your hands high, and I'll bring the microphone to you. Would you stand and say your name, please?
Hi, my name's Lisa LeBlanc, and I read an article about the bonds and women, and bonds for men are usually $1,000 to $2,000, and women's are going up to $15,000. Can you go into that a little bit as to why there's that discrepancy?
Sure. You mean the women who are in family detention? Yeah. I mean, the reason for that is that the government has adopted a position of we're not releasing you. So the minimum that a bond can be for anyone in immigrant detention anywhere in the country is $1,500. So the $1,000 to $200. That's why you're hearing that. But the women in family detention have been targeted. There's no better way to put it than that. They've been targeted for, like, we are not going to release you, and we're going to process you and deport you as soon as possible. And so they're setting very high bonds to facilitate that.
I know one of the first bonds we heard coming out of Dilley was at $12,000.
I'm not clear about the types of centers there are because I'm familiar with what Sacred Heart does. But where we've heard about children being held in cages on the border itself, do you know anything about that? And that's not in the detention center. What kind of center is that? Or is it true?
It's not, well, cage might be a bit of an over-exaggeration. There are what are called the ice boxes, and these are initial holding rooms that are created by ICE after an individual is initially detained at the border. Then there is what is supposed to be a maximum 72-hour period to determine where these individuals go. When these families are placed in there, it's hodgepodge, mix and match. So you may have a mom with 6 men and an infant, and her other kids are with 5 men. It's all mixed up. They just shuffle them all around until they figure out where these people need to go. That 72 hours has seemed to expand up to a week, sometimes even longer, before it's determined where the people are going to go. It's just like, do they ship them to Dilley? Do they ship them to Karns? Do they ship them to any place else in the nation? Or, oops, are we out of bed? So you'll get dropped off by Sacred Heart, so you go there. So,
did you mention, Paul, that those are run by Border Patrol?
No, I did not. Yep.
Yeah, those centers right on the border where they hold people initially are run by Customs and Border Protection. The family detention centers we're talking about are run by ICE, Immigration Customs Enforcement. And so those are different agencies. They're both under Homeland Security. But that's part of the reason why it's a kind of disparate.
Mm-hmm. The centers you're talking about, people are obviously being held, against their will. Could you elaborate a little bit on the types of, prison or security setups? Are these like minimum security prisons, or, how are they arranged in that sense?
Yeah, I can talk a little bit about that. So Carnes was built to be an immigrant detention center, and it was built to sort of comply with those new, better, softer side standards. So what's weird about Carnes, and it's even weirder now that they put the cartoon characters on the wall and stuff like that, is that you can be walking through it, in one moment you'll feel like you're in, there's a little playground there. And you'll feel like you're in maybe an apartment complex or something like that. And then as you're moving through it, they've got the big steel doors that lock and clang, and then you feel like you're in a prison. It's this weird mix of a secure facility, lockdown facility, and with a nice open courtyard. It's very weird, and it was built to be an immigrant detention center. Dilley was a man camp, for the oil field workers, and so that's why it's kind of like the rows of trailers and stuff like that. But those are just those two facilities. A lot of immigrant detention centers actually really have the feel of a medium or minimum security prison. In fact, the Hutto Detention Center, which we talked about a little bit earlier, was originally a medium security facility for adult men convicted of crimes. It was a state prison. And they retrofitted that into a family detention center, and now it's an immigrant detention center for adult women. But the architecture and the bones of it are still of a medium security prison. And that's true of many of the immigrant detention centers in the country.
I work in domestic violence at Fort Hood. I'm particularly interested in the women who are victims of domestic violence. My understanding is that there is legislation that enables those women to seek refugee status in the United States for that. I wonder if the San Antonio Center for Battered Women might be a resource, for those women.
It could be, and there have been instances, excuse me, where the battered women's shelter has come up. They have a small number of beds, and so that becomes an issue. And what becomes more of an issue is the imminent threat, because the women typically are no longer close to the abuser because they're in their home country. They may fall further down the list as opposed to a woman who is, in the home with the abuser still. So to that extent, I can't speak to it. I
can add a little bit to that.
Mm-hmm.
One thing to know is that it's really no exaggeration that probably 99% of the women there are fleeing domestic violence. I don't know, Paul, if you feel like that's an over...
It might be a little high.
A little high, but it's a lot. Certainly there's a lot of women there fleeing domestic violence. So that's definitely a root cause of this issue. That's something that's driving the women to flee. But one thing that has been hopeful is that the Board of Immigration Appeals, not too long ago, I think this fall, issued a ruling that said that domestic violence could be used as a basis for asylum. When you seek asylum, you have to prove that you're a member of a certain group, and that group makes you a target of violence in your home country, and that's usually race, religion, nationality, sexuality, things like that. But proving that I'm a woman being subjected to domestic violence, proving that makes you a member of a particular group was very difficult for attorneys. But the Board of Immigration Appeals ruled that women who are fleeing countries where the police deliberately do not act to protect married women from domestic violence or are complicit in it, in the case of where governments are very corrupt and populated by the cartels, could make it so that a woman can say that she does need asylum based on domestic violence. So that is something hopeful that's happened recently.
I was able to visit Carnes a whole day back in October and visited with 4 different mothers, one with 3 children, one with a baby, one with a 2-year-old, and then one with a 14-year-old son. And she said that her son, when boys reach, 12 or something, they're put in a separate dorm of just boys. There's a lot of other information I could add here, but she was very worried about him because she came because he was traumatized by gang recruitment and beat up women. And she was very worried about him, but she hardly ever got to see him because he was in school, and then he did his homework, and then he went to bed. So the question is there counseling, and what type of counseling is there?
They have 2 psychologists on staff, 1 woman and 1 man. in reports that I've heard from the inside, there haven't been any who've stated that they go regularly or even have checked in with the therapist there.
Can you explain a bit about how your visitation program works and what's expected of a visitor?
Well, you volunteer, you go through an orientation. Then after your orientation, you're ready to visit. You go with a visitor who's experienced, and then after that, you begin to visit a family member on your own. The intention is that you persist with that same family member or the same family through the duration of their detention. If you have the availability to assume another family, that certainly is an option. One thing I will say about, I feel a little risky being here with the show that's going to be on TV, is that the Carnes as well as the Hutto centers are both under the radar. We are not legally or we are not formally represented as a group to the centers because that could lead to a slew of red tape that would make it impossible for us to visit. We go in as friends. We are friends of these families. They have requested us to go there, and that's what we're living up to. We're going in as friends.
What proportion of women coming in actually do wind up having what are deemed credible
Credible
claims?
fear?
I'm sorry, I don't remember It's not many, though. Especially if you don't have an attorney, your chances are really slim, and I think, fewer than 75% of them even have an attorney. So I'm sorry, I don't know, but
yeah, and one of the forms of action that Raices has taken up is because they've seen that their role has had to change from solely representing underage or under 18 children. That they're like, this crisis has made us change paths. And so at this point, they are working with the families to do pro se bond packets, which is that they represent themselves. It's determined, according to the lawyers and legal assistants who go in, based on the individual's strength, stamina, and ability. If they can do that, if they can go through that, then they certainly encourage them to, and there have been success stories along that line. So it can happen that you can get through the CFI and you can go on to the bond hearing on your own. It does happen, but for most, it's just too much. It's too much of navigating a system they don't understand, and the lawyer is certainly wildly helpful.
I wanted to check with you also. You mentioned that Geo Corporation is the company that's sponsoring these detention facilities and may be affiliated with Correct Care Solutions. Is that right?
It's two different companies. Carnes is run by the Geo Group, and Dilley is run by the Corrections Corporation of America. They're the two competitors. They're the largest private prison companies.
And a question I have, because I'm aware that Geo Corporation is trying to move into taking over public mental hospitals, and they've had a poor track record in some other states. There have been some lawsuits. Is there any regulation that you know of or system for evaluating the adequacy of these companies that have moved into the private detention or prison business?
Well, just to give you a little insight, ICE contracts not only with Geo Group and CCA, but with any of a number of state and local municipalities to detain immigrants. In some situations, it's a small town of 5,000, and there's the county jail, and that's where they go. In some cases, you have larger structures like Carnes and like Dilley that are overseen, but there's no type of true oversight on the part of ICE to say, yes, you're doing these things properly, or no, you're not. It's pretty much like, we contracted you. That contract elicits a level of trust. You have at it.
I understand that, and just to say it on correct now, I understand there are 4 facilities, Hutto, Carnes, Dilley, and
Pearsall is the men's facility.
Okay, so there's more than 4. You mean in the whole country or no? Texas?
Oh, in Texas, there's about 25 immigrant detention centers. We have the most of any. There are hundreds of them in general.
And then the other part is, who runs Dilley?
Corrections Corporation of America. Mm-hmm.
Right. If you have stock, if you have an investment fund, something like that, let your investor know to divest from those stocks.
Yeah. That actually reminds me of something that I wanted to let you all know, and maybe some of you are wondering, how much money are they making? The GEO Group last August told their shareholders on an investor call that they were really excited because they were going to make $15 million in annual revenue at the Carnes facility when it changed over to family detention. And they were really excited because it was a more expensive contract than just to hold the adult men. So their investors were very happy about that. CCA told their investors on a call actually just last week, they have quarterly calls to let their investors know how they're doing, that they'll make $21 million in annual revenue with the facility in Dilley. So it's big bucks.
Can't say it. Williamson County got some kind of income from the detention center. So how are the counties involved? I mean, are they getting part of this, or is there a contract between the county? You know, is it a three-way contract?
It's a great question, and it's actually very different in Carnes than it is in Dilley.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the contract that Carnes has with GEO Group is that for administrative costs or whatnot like that, Carnes receives $100,000 a year.
In Dilley, it's actually you should check it out on NPR because the story did a great job of explaining all this, and it's super complex, so I'll try to do it very quickly. But the city of Eloy, Arizona is actually where the Dilley contract goes through, presumably because Williamson County said, we don't want to be in the family detention business anymore. We had enough of that, and they apparently couldn't find anyone anywhere closer in the state to operate that government contract. So if you can imagine, in Eloy, Arizona, that is the city that's making the revenue off the center in Dilley. CCA just routed it through that contract, and it's a very shady deal. You should check it out on NPR.
Mm-hmm. And there's a website, I'm not sure if it's Texas Prison Bidness, B-I-D, like a bid, Bidness, and that's a great site to go to and find out exactly what the nuts and bolts of this process are.
Thank you for giving us a program on a social problem that we need to know a lot more about, and thank you so much.
Good job.